Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another LinkedIn Live with NetSpy. If you missed the last one with Vinay and Aaron and me, where we talked about the new brand, the platform, check that one out. You can go check out just click on however you're watching this, YouTube, LinkedIn, whatever. Go click on our company name. You can go find our old post and you can find the video from last time and watch it. Today, we're going to talk about all things NIST. I'm Tim Malkoviter, EVP of Strategy for NetSpy. Joining me today is Beth Barrick, our Senior Director of Product Marketing. And I'll have you introduce yourself in just a second. But first, just so you guys all know, NIST decided not only do they have this new framework that everyone must comply with, but they want to change your job titles. And we're going to post the link. You can go read this later. They think there's 52 job titles. And I'm going to read this quote because only NIST can make a statement like this. The plan changes come after a March update to the NIST framework. That's the name for their new thing because they're nice. Which added 11 new competency areas, including AI security, cloud security, and cyber resiliency, whatever the heck that is, as well as more than 2,000 task, knowledge, and skill statements. Now, Beth and I were trying to figure this out before. We don't know what a task, knowledge, or skill statement it is. That's only like you got to be in this to do this. But anyway, welcome, Beth. Please do a quick introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Tim. I'm so excited to be here with you today. It's always fun to talk to you. I am the newly hired Senior Director of Product Marketing here at NetSpy. Been here since the end of 2023. And I'm really excited to be building out the product marketing function here at NetSpy and also talking to you about NIST. And not just NIST, but NIST, MITRE, ISO, fill in the blank of frameworks. And we're not going to be going line by line. I promise you, you will not be learning about 15.9.2.7 and how to comply with it. I promise. We are actually going to abstract some things out of these frameworks, talk to you about our cheat codes and how you can actually apply these frameworks to really being proactive in your security. And I think it's particularly important for those of you who are either new in your role or new to cybersecurity. As I mentioned to Tim, I was actually on my way to a cybersecurity conference, and I mentioned that to my Uber driver who told me he just had graduated with a degree in cybersecurity and asked me for some tips. So I think that these frameworks are important for those people, Tim, who are very net new to our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first question we got to ask and answer, Beth, is, do I have to comply with NIST? NIST says it's out there for everybody. I think the safe answer, you and I probably both agree on this, is if you're not sure that you need to comply, the answer is no, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. They're great people. I'm sure they mean very, very well, but it doesn't mean you have to go do everything that's in there. However, there's a lot of good things you can pull out of it. And I think that's what we're going to kind of talk about. Like, what can we actually just take away from that? So obviously, compliance. Not my favorite part of cybersecurity. I think it's distracting a lot of times from doing real security. I think it can be confusing. I think it's a time sink. I remember a certain retailer chasing PCI compliance and spending a boatload of money chasing like TLS 1.0 and SSL 2, like very theoretical vulnerabilities that are never going to result in a credit card breach, but whatever. So compliance stuff, not the best, not the most exciting thing. I feel like not a lot of people say, well, I'm going to go off and spend a bunch of money, rack up student loans and get into compliance. I think it's one of those things that you do because it's a necessary evil to really drive the needle, right? So that said, so if you're if you're being secure, you're likely probably more or less most of the way to compliant. Would you agree, Beth?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good bellwether sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's like it's a good starting point to kind of borrow from them.
Yeah. And I think I would love to hear from people in the chat about, are they wrangling with these frameworks, right? What is your least favorite thing about trying to wrestle with these frameworks? So hopefully we'll get some good feedback from our audience about that. But while we're waiting for that, I think what we want to talk about, Tim, is what do security professionals really need to know and do, right? What is the sort of TLDR of these frameworks, and how should people really be thinking about them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely, by the way, definitely to Beth's point, tell us what you don't like about these frameworks, because everyone has to deal with them on some level, and we all just it's kind of where we just band together for a moment and just grin and bear it. So what do we like? I think the biggest thing to take away from this is, like, you don't have to memorize it. You joked when we started, you don't have to know 15.2.7. I think is that the number you said. I don't even know if that's a real number. I'm just gonna trust that it might be. You don't have to memorize all the frameworks to the point where you know the things. Now, if you're in compliance every single day, I remember back in the day with PCI, especially when AppSec was brand new. I remember PCI 6. Whatever, and it's up here just because that's what drove the needle to actually get application security to work at my organization at the time. So you're gonna pick it up and memorize it, but doesn't mean you should, right? You don't have to. I like to look at it as step back, think bigger. I really like the phrase left of boom, right of boom. I know that's one of those things. Yet another thing that cyber stolen or borrowed from military. I never served in the military, but that's still a concept that resonates with me, meaning left of boom. I imagine a timeline. I've got all the things before something bad happens. I get the thing that's bad, and I got all the things to the right of it, like after bad happens, and think, am I ready in all those different categories? Am I ready before it happens, during, and after? And that's the kind of stuff that these frameworks are trying to force you to do from a compliance perspective. So yeah, I think that's kind of the good way to look at it. What do you think?
Yeah, I like that left of boom, right of boom idea. So can you kind of talk about things like, how would that, we have frameworks, for example, like MITRE, for the details of the boom, if you will, right? Mapping your detail to the boom. And can you talk a little bit more about that, Tim? And then also talk about maybe, what are some of the bigger ideas we can take out of that right of boom, left of boom? What are some of the stages and phases we can think about in there?
Yeah, MITRE is definitely a good way to look at this. Obviously, this goes to show that all these different frameworks, they all model something a little differently. So MITRE is really good for talking about the attack kill chain, if that's the phrasing you like to use, or thinking about from the point of, like, actually now it's the point of ideation, like an attacker thinking about breaking into doing something. It's even thinking about that. I don't know that there's a whole lot of an actual enterprise can do to defend about somebody thinking about doing something bad, but it's out there. And now CISOs, you're going to probably put it on your like MITRE attack bingo card, and you're going to say, I need that thing covered up. I need to have coverage for when a bad guy thinks about doing something bad. And that's just crazy. But we still have it. And so it helps you to kind of map through, like, okay, they're going to do something to get initial access. I've got all these different things of initial access. I got execution. And then once I'm there and I'm doing something there, okay, I'm probably going to get some sort of persistence. And I'm just going to go through these different stages. I'm going to get from after I've got this access and I have persistence, meaning, like, if I get a little bit of friction from my defender, I can stick around, I can weather the storm, I can stay inside this network or this environment I don't belong. And then they start thinking about, okay, where am I? Like, what am I doing? That's the whole discovery columns, and then the lateral movement, privilege escalation, and all that stuff happens after that. Command and control, people like to focus on the right half of that too much. I think we over-index on some of that stuff sometimes, where we think about C2 and exfiltration. And my argument was always, like, if you know, I'm going to nerd out for a second. If you know Shannon's law of information theory, you can make a channel, you can make a signal out of almost anything. Right. So, like, why focus on DLP or exfiltration, right? When if I've got execution here, I can find a way to get my data out of there. It doesn't matter how locked down it is. Some of my favorite stories involving leaking credit card data, encrypted, by the way, because we protected our customers' data, encrypted using DNS queries inside of a double DMZ retail PCI environment. Like, you can figure out ways out. So I don't like to even think about that kind of stuff. But taking it back to NIST, though, the thing I really like about this is we can kind of like line this up and think about their terms. They like to use the terms identify, protect, detect, respond. Those are the four that I think really resonate with NetSpy and what we do. There's obviously governance is out there now, and there's recover way out in the far right. So something really, really bad happened, and then like I've responded to a threat, I've contained a threat, but now I need to like recover the business. I need to bring up systems. Maybe there was ransomware. I need to get systems restored and brought back up. All that's out there. But Beth, you and I are old enough to remember before NIST, it was pretty much just prevent, detect, respond, right? And I really like that simplicity. Prevent things, detect things, respond to things. I still think of it in those terms, right? I like to tell people all the time, why do you focus on detection? Because your prevention controls will fail at some point. They're not perfect. They're going to fail. And when they fail, you need detections. Why do I need detection? Why do I need a response? Well, because when your detection controls, your alarms go off. I need to know what the heck to do with them. And so that's where that really is. And so obviously NIST has taken that identify and protect, and they're just splitting prevent into those two pieces, and we can talk about that obviously. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's it's funny, Tim, because I think that those words that you mentioned, that really is the basic tenet of proactive security, right?
Correct.
And I think that's a lot of what we at NetSpy are trying to get our clients to do, get our customers to do, get our prospects to do, is to really abstract things, all these frameworks, into more of a concept of proactive security and what are sort of the core strategic things you need to think about, and what are the things you're deploying to address those three things. So I would say, now that we know those are our three basic philosophies, if you will, right, that we're extracting out of all of these frameworks, how do you feel people need to address them? Or what do you feel like is the sort of framework for people to think about them? And obviously, if you're a very large customer or prospect, right, a really, really large enterprise, you might have a little bit of a different way that you think about them, or your team might have a different way to think about them. So would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, for those of you playing along, do you guys think in terms of left and right of boom, or do you think in terms of identify, protect, detect, respond? Do you think in terms of prevention, detection, response? Like how do you think, if you've got a different framework or you like these, like sound off, let us know in the comments. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, in terms of like actually doing this, you hit a good point. Enterprise, big enterprise, smaller commercial organizations, massively different experience in terms of execution. A massive enterprise is going to have the ability to obviously silo out. And one of the cool things about working for a really large enterprise like that is that you can specialize in the most niche thing. I like to tell people all the time, when I started out in cybersecurity, information security was the specialty. There was no other specialty. We didn't like have, I'm an email security person. Like that didn't even exist. Right. And even email security as a concept is an old term now. Like when you think about how these roles have split out and how people have latched onto different functions. And now you've got people that just do, like, I just do DevOps sec, right? That's all I do. I've got people that like, I just want to be a pen tester and stay a pen tester for life. That kind of stuff wasn't possible when I started, when you started, Beth, right? It's like you had to kind of play all around. But in a really, really large enterprise, you're going to have people like able to focus on specific things. Like I can just focus on prevention controls. I'm probably in a security engineering position, or maybe I'm an AppSec person and I'm thinking about the application layers of this and I'm focusing on those things. Or I work in the SOC and my job is to make sure that all of the detections are working and testing. And that's probably, man, that's an easy one to get sucked into a reactive mode where like I'm just responding to the queue and what's on fire. And you're like very tactically thinking, how do I put a detection for this bad thing so I never experience it again, or I experienced it earlier, instead of like, how do I get ahead? And that's where things like MITRE attack really help in that kind of niche, right? We can really think about that. And then respond, obviously, incident response is a big component to a major enterprise, whereas like small commercial, you're not going to have an incident responder on staff. Not at all. You're probably not going to have a SOC like person on staff. You're going to have that outsourced. So you're working with a partner, and it's going to look and feel differently. You got to manage a vendor that's going to go do the detections for you, and you're going to need to make sure that you're actually, are they doing what they say they're going to do? How good are they? All that kind of stuff has to come up. So I mean that comes into, by the way, like perfectly aligned with like how NetSpy views the world. Right? We very much see that world the same way. Identify, protect, detect, respond. Identify for us is like that is embedded in how we approach an external pen test, and even in a more continuous fashion, it's embedded in how we focus on attack surface management, right? How many of our customers come on and enroll into our attack surface management, and we discover assets they didn't know they had? Like every one of them. Every one of them. Like there's never a time that we don't find something that they're like, oh, I forgot about that, or oh, I didn't know this existed, or oh, whatever. Like, wait, who spun that up? Wait, what that? Are you sure that's mine? Like, yeah, because of this and this other reason. I'm like, oh yeah, wow, that is mine. So the old adage, you can't protect what you don't know you have. So you have to identify it. And so as much as I want to begrudgingly give NIST a hard time for taking prevent and breaking it up into two pieces, that's really the reason why, is because you have to be able to find it and know that it's there in order to protect it. So we've got all that. And protection, obviously, NetSpy, we focus hard on the pen test side where we're validating, is it protected? Is it protectable? Right? And we're looking at it from that perspective. What vulnerabilities are out there that you need to go fix? What things are messed up in your code? Maybe what's wrong in your architecture and your implementation, that sort of thing. We're definitely focused hard on that. And then we play very hard on the DTAC side, but people tend to kind of forget that about us because obviously our penetration testing pedigree and our history, how we got to where we are. But we've been doing detection controls assessments, is what they used to be called here, for 12 years. And that's largely what we call now our BAS, or breach and attack simulation, our platform, which is we sell it as a platform. We also sell it as engagements. And how we approach it is like, look, your detections may not work well. You don't know it. Like it's super hard to get this right. You can have the best EDR tools on the planet and still have endpoint detection attack surface that you didn't know. And we're pivoting into like cloud. Like, what's your cloud detection surface? Like every asset class has detection like options. And how good are you at seeing all the things there? And then again, mapping it back to MITRE. And then there's obviously overlays around top of this NIST thing. So, and then lastly, like respond. And then this is where NetSpy kind of stops. We don't go the other side. But it would be remiss if we didn't talk about, how do you know you're ready to respond? And the best way to do that's a red team. I'm a big red team person. If you know anything about me, I've been built and ran the red team at Walmart for 5 years. And one of the biggest things for me was, even me, when I went into that, I just thought, oh, this is penetration testing plus. It's just gonna be bigger and more fun and larger scope and all this stuff. But it didn't take long to figure out, no. The value in these is a little bit of testing detections, right? What's there and what's not there. But the reality is you're gonna pass detections at some point. Like, there's detections aren't perfect, just like preventions aren't perfect. It's really about testing the organization's ability to respond. So and once a red team guy gets that, figures that out, and starts hitting that button with the blue team partner or peer or a customer, like that really generates a ton of growth. Because what happens is you come in here and say, okay, I'm going to put you in a specific position where it's challenging for you to respond. It's a little different. Or I'm going to do something like, I'm going to do two things at once. I'm going to give you a dilemma. I'm going to give you a noisy thing that you can go chase, and I'm going to give you a dark, subtle thing that like you're not really sure, and make you kind of have the choice. Which one do you go chase? And this is where it gets really fun, because you get to get in the head of the responder, and then you get to help that responder grow. So a lot of win there, but we very much we pull that out, and we very much align with these. And this is definitely how NetSpy sees the world. Not necessarily, hey NIST, not because of you, but because it's just the way cyber works. So.
Yeah, but I think to your point though, Tim, like there is value, right? Even though we poke fun of things like these frameworks, there definitely is value in these frameworks. And I think one thing that you're drawing out there in talking about not only how to address these different phases, but also all these different people in your org, right? So there's AppSec people, there's NetSec people, there's, you have to align them and get them all aligned around one thing, one common goal. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is that everybody needs to be aligned around the risk to the business, right? And I think that at the end of the day is what NIST is trying to say. They're trying to come up with a framework for cyber professionals to protect their risk to their business. So I would love to hear from you about what you think, or how you think both an enterprise and a smaller company can actually validate what is that risk, and even maybe put a dollar figure to it.
Yeah, that's great question. So every time the concept of risk comes up, I was, let's say, impacted or steered or influenced, whatever the word is, by a guy named Dan Geer, Geer. For all of you people in cyber that less than 10 years, go look up this guy, go find some of his old talks. I'm telling you, they're just still as relevant as ever. He's the guy that called Microsoft out in the early days before the back pre-Windows XP Service Pack 2, before they started focusing on security. He's the guy that invented Kerberos, which like any on-prem network in the world runs on. Like this is one of our founding giants, and he's a really good guy. And he had this talk that he gave, and I was pre-podcast. I was this nerd driving to my first job, and I had an iPod Nano. Do you remember what those are? Little ones with the flash memory. And I had an auxiliary cable, and I had an auxiliary input into my dash. And I had like 5 talks that I downloaded off the internet in MP3 format and put it onto this iPod Nano. And I used to play them over and over again. And the 2 of them were Dan's. So Dan Gears talks, and one of them was talking about like with risk, you have to have like if you show me basically the adage is, if you show me a business that has no risk, I will show you a company that's going out of business, right? Like it's impossible to not, you need to have risk. And that kind of freaked me out and woke me up, because I at that point in my career I was thinking, oh, my job is to eliminate all these things. And I was also naive at the early stage of my career. I was thinking, if I just get the recipe of security controls right, then like security is not a problem and all the risks are resolved, right? But the reality is there is a certain amount of risk you need to put in play. Today, how many organizations are rolling out LLMs? They're doing chatbots. They're doing stuff with this new generative AI stuff, and they're embracing it. Why? Because if they don't, on the one side, you've got this business risk that you're no longer relevant, right? On the other side, they're freaking out. Am I doing this right? What am I exposing? Do I have training data that's going to come out? Do I have PII that's going to be in the training data? Do I have like intellectual property that I'm going to give away to the world because I don't understand this new technology? Like, I don't know. But you've got this scenario, and that's like obviously a great one that's really relevant today. But the point is, you're going to have risk on either side. So how do you measure it? Well, it depends. It always depends. So one of my first rules is that if I'm talking in terms of like cyber risk, and I'm talking to a financial company, I will just immediately go defer and say, okay, you tell me what risk means to you, because you're going to have a very specific formula. It's going to mean something very, very specific, right? And anything that I say is not going to matter. For all the other companies, the way NetSpy kind of sees this world is, yeah, we put risk scores on stuff. Like we have risk scores in our attack surface management and our pen tests and blah, 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 blah. We've been doing it for a long time. And it's not so much for our smaller companies that are not in the finance space. It's not so much that they care about like what the actual score is. They care about the trend, right? If I had a 37, don't know what that means. Is that 37 out of 40? Is that 37 out of 100? Doesn't matter. I have a 37 and today it's a 36. I want to know why. If I had a 37 out of 38, cool. What do we do? What impacted that? And that trend is what matters more than anything, right? But the big orgs, the ones I've seen that do this the best, use fair accounting. I am not a fair accountant. FAIR. I can't explain it. It involves things like Monte Carlo simulations, would sound exotic and like you're going to a casino or something. That's not me. But I worked with some people that did that. Like they were actual cyber actuaries that did this kind of stuff. And they get to the point where they could say, look, we were trending all of this breach data. So if an organization's got PII, we've got all these different breaches that involve PII, all these with PHI, all these that involve credit cards, all these that involve like electronic account ACH numbers, right? I can see all of these. I can know what the cost is in like post-mortem. I can tell you what the fines are for missing the regulatory compliance. I can tell you what the stock market hit was. I can tell you what the operational costs, if it's a publicly traded company, they have to like look at Change Healthcare. They're writing off $1 billion this year, right? Because of that breach. You can know, okay, well now I know $1 billion. Change Healthcare had how many things that were affected. Cool. Now I can come up with a cost per record is kind of the idea behind it. It's not just, the breach itself and the fines, but it's also, I had missing gaps. I'm going to go install controls, which means I got to hire people to put them in, which means I need to grow my program and like operating costs go. There's all these things that go factor into there. And you can ultimately trigger that down to like a cost per record. So the really, really, really big companies that do this really well do it cost per record. So, but Beth, I know you want to know about the small companies, right?
Yeah, because I think, those kinds of things are probably already in place with a big enterprise, right? But if I'm a small organization and I don't have that kind of staff and I don't have that kind of budget, right? We know that security budgets are constantly shrinking. How can I think about what is the most important thing to protect, or how can I at least start with my approach to thinking about, to your point, right? If I have to have risk, I'm a company, Otherwise, I'm out of business. But how can I decide what is that most important thing to put my focus on if I'm not one of these really large enterprises?
Yeah, that is the hard question. So part of the focus, like the vision for NetSpy, is we're building out our attack surface management, and we're thinking about the new platform has attack graph capability in there. So if it's a penetration testing engagement, a pen tester can go and say, all right, like, attackers thinking graphs as the adage goes. Like, I can go, I started with this particular thing, this particular asset, vulnerability in it, and I can change. If I can prove out that I've got this connection, right, this attack graph to something of extreme value, maybe it's a database and it's got 100,000 records of PII. The easy button is like, okay, I can go do what the big companies do, and I can do it for a smaller company. Our vision is to get there. We're not there today, but we're going to chase this where we can say, look, you've got 100,000 records of PII. It's $23 a record. That's a $2.3 million exploit chain. Like, there's your risk. I can quantify it. You can disagree with me about if it's $23. In fact, most of the good actuaries will do a range. They'll say 23 to 37 or some number like that. And then there's your range. You don't have to be exactly spot on. You've got, like, ballpark now, right? Or zip code level accuracy. So that's there. But for everyone else, what I would tell somebody in a smaller organization, obviously, like, ransomware is the big topic. Why is ransomware a topic in the boardroom? Why do they care? Ultimately, the reason why they care is if I get ransomed out, my business goes offline. And I can almost guarantee you any size company can, if they don't know off the top of their head, they can calculate really, really fast what downtime costs. If I'm got a factory floor, I probably already have an hourly rate, of downtime expense, because I can have things like machines break and everything else. And that's probably already a quality control metric that's in the business inside that floor. If I'm a call center and I'm just dealing with customer support, or I'm doing sales outbound or whatever, like, you're going to have a number associated with, well, my call center normally generates this much money in revenue, or normally saves this many accounts, or normally does, like, whatever. I can know if my customer support number is down, I'm probably going to lose this many customers. Like, you can quantify that out. Like, that's a good place, and start doing that across the business and figure out, like, how many different places, if it's down, it's just down, and this is the cost. Now you have an availability cost. Another model we didn't talk about is the good old fashioned CIA triad. Which I don't really want to go into today, Beth, because we've already, like, acronymed out too much. But the point is, like, you can know what that is, right? So that's what a smaller company should do. Obviously, tie it back to ransomware, because your C-suite, your board really care about that. They're gonna know what that is. Everyone knows what that is, and it's obviously just to keep the business going cost. By the way, probably don't go chase the latest cyber threat intel, like that kind of stuff. A good way of putting it is, you don't need to worry about the nation state. If you can't figure out what your availability cost is for your business going down, you probably don't need to. You're probably not the victim of the Russian FSB, right?
I love that you brought that up, Tim. That's great, because I think, and this sort of segues into our very last question, which I know you love to think about, because I think this is really important. I think people get really focused on the shiny object, right? Particularly every time there's something in the news, a nation state attack, whatever it is. So our last question, which kind of brings everything full circle, which I know you love to think about, is, if you were the new CISO, what would be the things that you would focus on, right? We know it's not the nation state attack. What would it be?
Yeah, first of all, this is a dumb mental game that I play all the time. I want to sit here like, okay, clean sheet of paper, what would it do? And the answer obviously is, it depends. I need to know what kind of business I am. I need to know how much, like, what security is already here. Like, what do I have? But if let's say we're at I'm in a startup that managed to be, I'm 5 years old, and I've gotten to the point where I've established some product market fit, and I'm growing, and I'm doing all the things I'm going to do. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, we need to do cyber. And we never really thought about it before. We've done just basic IT to help the business run, but that's it. And I'm like, okay, cool. What am I going to do first? Well, the first thing I always go to in that scenario in my head is detections. And the reason why I go to detections first is your prevention controls are always going to fail, and you may not have any, right? And if you're in a limited budget, you're likely never going to have any prevention. Like, there's not going to be money for that. Nothing's going to exist. Or even if you do something to get money, like, you can only deploy so many of them at a time, and they're only going to cover so much. So, like, the first thing you should always do is just know what in the world is going on in my environment right now. So that's things like, obviously today, if you ask me tactically, I would say EDR, endpoint detection response, really, really important. Obviously, any of these tools that have detections like this, and I would do the same thing if you're heavily in cloud, like there's cloud detection response controls. There's cool stuff with identity now. All the asset classes, all the types of things generate really good telemetry. You don't want raw telemetry. You want something smart that sits there on top of it and says, this is like a high likelihood of being bad. Once I have that, that needs to go someplace and it needs to be reviewed. If it's not reviewed and somebody's not doing something with it, then what's the point? It's just an alarm going off, and you might as well just hit mute on the fire alarm while the building burns, right? Like, there's no point in having that unless you do that. So you need obviously a SOC. You need to have some sort of, maybe it's a managed detection response outsourced arrangement with an MSSP or whomever. Like, you need that function. And if you're new, that's probably the easiest way to get it, because good grief, hiring that, building that program, building that, all that, like, that's going to take time. So if I'm new and I got to get in and go, outsource right away, get it going. So then after you've got that, you need to start thinking, okay, now I can go back to my fundamental preventions. Ball in the back of my head, I'm going to go, how do I know these detections work? So fundamental preventions for me are multi-factor authentication. How do I don't want anything single factor sitting around anywhere, because that's too easy for people to do social engineering or password guessing, password sprays, and get in. That's one of the things as Red Team where every time we found one of those, like, we're going to hit our objective. It was, if we could find it, we knew we were going to go really far. And then obviously, what do I have? And then I can go back to all that stuff we talked about a minute ago, Beth. Like, what I need to know what my attack surface is. So let's get some sort of continuous ASM in here, and let's make sure we're getting patching. But somewhere in that time frame too, I'm probably going to go, okay, I've got basic detection up because I bought a product and I hired somebody to come in and kind of watch it for me. And I've got some basic fundamental preventions in here, but how do I know that they're working? I need to go test these detections, and then I need to go test my preventions. And that's where I'd be looking at somebody like NetSpy to come help out. So that's kind of like, if I had 2 minutes to get a program up and running, that'd be probably my blueprint today. I think that blueprint has largely stood the test of time with me. Especially the last 10 years, like, that's really the way things go. And I think that's probably the blueprint I would follow 5-10 years from now. Although the technologies and the terms and stuff like that will probably change around as we get better stuff. But today, that's the way I would look at it.
Well, and what I find so interesting, Tim, is that kind of ties a lot back to what we've been talking about cybersecurity frameworks and NIST and, identify, detect, protect, respond, right? So ideally, at the end of the day, that still is the core of what we feel like you should be doing for best practice, whether you're a net new CISO, whether you're new to cybersecurity, or whether you've been in this business for a long time. So Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. We are at time today. I want to thank our audience for being here, and to let you know that you can feel free to continue the conversation on LinkedIn or at netspy.com. We would love to hear from you. And please join us again on June 3rd for our NetSpy platform webinar, where you can hear more about our new NetSpy platform. Thanks so much, everyone.